author, columnist, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com, talk show host, and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's show, we are talking the big, beautiful bill, the ramifications for debt, and the ever-expanding defense budget. It's going to be quite the show. And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Now, we're joined by Liberty Nation's economics expert, Mr. Andrew Moran, to talk about the recent jobs report. And there's a couple of fascinating points that I kind of want to tease out from you and examine, because as I'm sure you've noticed, Andrew, the reporting on the jobs report was so bizarre. You had half of the internet saying it's an utter disaster. I thought Trump was going to do X, Y, and Z. And the other half was showing these numbers. And it looked to me like the other half, the ones showing the improvements, were in the right. But what do I know, Andrew? Why am I wrong? Or am I not?
Well, here's just a factual analysis of the report. It was It wasn't anything great. I mean, it was a Biden-era type jobs report because most of the job gains were in government. You look at the household portion of the jobs report, which removes duplication. It showed a smaller number. Yes, it came in higher than expected, and the unemployment rate dipped. But the headline figure, or a deeper dive, would suggest, is Joe Biden still in office? So it wasn't a lot of private sector growth. It was mostly government, particularly at the state and local level.
Well, let's look at that. So why is there a government sector growth at the state and local level when we've seen since the beginning of Trump's second term here, we've seen a lot of layoffs, resignations, and retirements, right?
Yeah, so if you dive deeper into the state and local figures, you see that a lot of it is actually in education. So a lot of school boards are hiring more teachers or more staff, or of course, as we all know, the last several years, more administrators. So overall, I mean, it's mostly education driven at the state and local level. But but the federal level though, it is actually declined again. I think it's overall year to date, the number of the decline in federal workers is around 59,000. people. So, I mean, at the federal level, that's a good thing. But overall, when you want, as Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, said, when you want to re-privatize the government, the June jobs report doesn't illustrate that trend.
Okay. So you had an increase in state and local government jobs. How was the private sector on that?
It was far lower. So overall, there were 147,000 new jobs in June. The private sector accounted for about. The problem with that figure because the problem is with and they count, let's say, healthcare, social assistance, things like that as private sector, but it's more government adjacent that it is private sector. Sure. So if you look at let's say the payroll processor ADP, it came out with a report around 2 days before, and it said that the private sector actually eliminated 33,000 jobs. So that shows that the private sector is perhaps slowing down. A trend over the past year actually has been a freeze. So the economists joke that the labor market is in an ice age because companies are not hiring, nor are they firing. They have a lot of job openings, but for the most part, they're at a standstill because they're waiting for the election results, and the next part they're waiting for now with tariffs, waiting for more certainty into the broader economy. So overall, the private sector, I mean, they added jobs, but it's things like healthcare and social assistance that rely heavily on government funding to add these jobs. So when you say, how does the private sector do, there's more to it than just pointing out the private sector payroll growth number.
Sure. So you mentioned the ADP there, which for a long time was quite what's the way to say this? It was viewed as quite a reliable indicator, but people... Yeah, well, I mean, it did have a reputation. Now, I'm talking pre-Biden times here, but now a lot of people are sort of running away from it or not, I guess, investing their ideas as much in the data that it produces. Why is that?
Yeah, so actually, their problems actually predate Joe Biden. They actually
Yeah,
went
yeah.
through a methodology change in 2022, but overall, it's been a very unreliable indicator, mainly because they have different because the numbers are all over the place. The changes they rely on the companies that use their services, but it underestimates job growth for the most part. So I did a story on this. I think I did a story on this for LibertyNation.com, and I showed how if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data and you compare it to the ADP typically underestimates that number. But even the Bureau of Labor Statistics data is also an unreliable figure. If I
Sure.
want to go through real labor market numbers, you actually have to wait maybe a year from the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, which uses actually tax receipts to determine the real employment gains or losses.
Well, that was the story over the last 4 years, wasn't it? That we'd have some job numbers that come out from the Biden administration that were touted as, oh, look at these great job numbers. And then a month later, there'd be revisions, a month to month and a half later, there'd be revisions bringing it down. And then the year-on-year data, again, there were more revisions bringing it down and down. Do you think we'll have, and I don't know if there's a way to really accurately, if even predict is the right word for this, but do you think we'll see downwards revisions on Trump's jobs data, either monthly or on a year-by-year basis?
Well, interesting you bring that up because if you look at the June jobs report, the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually revised the few months jobs data upward, which is
Good.
alien. I mean, we haven't seen that in years, so it wasn't significant, but it was an upward adjustment to the numbers.
Okay, so you wrote a fantastic piece on the pages of LibertyNation.com that highlighted something that I think for people who are fans of Donald Trump will be super exciting news, and for people who are not, maybe the opposite. And that was that this latest report shows that U.S. citizens were getting the lion's share of the jobs, and those who are not were sinking quite a lot. Give us the details.
Yeah, so if you compare the January 2025 numbers to June 2025, you see that divergence between U.S. born and foreign born employment levels actually narrow. So since January 2025, U.S. born employment levels actually have soared by more than 2 million. If you look at employed foreign born workers, that's actually declined by 502,000. So if you go back to, let's say, October 2019, when there's pretty much this saga began, that there was such a huge gap between the employed foreign and U.S. born workers. But it's still early in the Trump administration. You still have many years to catch up. But overall, for a lot of President Trump supporters, this is a positive. This is a sign suggests that the U.S. economy is heading in the right direction for the American people. Because for so long, you've always heard that all foreigners are taking American jobs, but now you can make the joke that hey, Americans are taking foreigners' jobs.
I think that's going on a bumper sticker, Andrew. We're going to be back with Andrew Moran after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and we're continuing our conversation with Liberty Nation's economics editor, Mr. Andrew Moran. Thanks for sticking around, Andrew. Now, what I really want to dig into here is this last week. So we saw the Donald Trump sign the Big Beautiful Bill Act. And it's clear it's the most contentious thing this week for opponents of it. But also people who would ordinarily support many of the things that Donald Trump does are also a little hesitant on this. And I wonder if, let's say Elon Musk in particular, who's thrown those particular teddies out of the pram with this, but he might be right that there's a fiscal waywardness taking place here. So what I really want to dig into is what the headline numbers mean in reality. So there's been there's an increase within the bill, well, an allowable increase within the bill of, is it 4 trillion?
The Senate version it made it $5 trillion. So I think that was what the House was voting on. So I think it's either way, $4 to $5 trillion. It's a hefty sum.
Well, what's $1 trillion between friends? So now that's money that's not been spent yet. Now, you and I both know that if that money's dangling there in front of them like ripe fruit, they're going to take it, aren't they? And they're going to spend it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we all know that's what's going to happen. So the
Yeah.
problem that let's say Elon Musk has is that they tend to think that this is going to dramatically increase the national debt and dramatically raise a deficit.
Sure.
Now, the one report that everyone keeps citing is the Congressional Budget Office, but it seems like not a lot of people have read it, because if you look at their analysis of the reconciliation package, their conclusion is that over the next 10 years, this bill is going to reduce outlays by about $1.2 trillion. At the same time, it's going to reduce revenues by about $3.5 trillion. So you see a certain dichotomy on the fiscal side of this. But they also came out with a separate report, and it said that tariff incomes over the next 10 years is going to raise revenues by about $2.5 trillion. So right there, if that is a reliable estimate, considering how we all know that the situation's fluid and trade flows could be upended,
Sure, of course.
But if it doesn't, then that $2.5 trillion is going to make up for the most part that lost revenues by about plus or minus a few $100 billion.
Well, you and I discussed this before when we were trying to hammer down a more conservative figure on what the tariffs would bring in, and I posed about 100 to 110 billion a year, and we kind of agreed that was, and ultimately that's quite a realistic figure rather than the $500 billion that was floated when it first started with Doge, right?
Yeah. So if you look at the monthly daily treasury statement, which is really fascinating reading, you see
Andrew reads it, so you don't have to.
You see that tariff income right now is at record level. I mean, it's not astronomical, but it's about $25 billion a month. Fiscal year to date, it's already over $120 billion. So, if this trend continues, then you could be looking at a sizable chunk of revenue just from the tariffs itself. Now, President Trump, he's come out with various different policies. I mean, he wants to now, slap higher the April 2nd tariffs on U.S. trading partners. But if you just have that 10% flat tariff percentage rate, then you have, let's say, your number, which could actually be higher based on these recent daily treasury statement numbers.
So there's also something else that just doesn't get talked about enough with regards to these monumental figures, and that's that. If there is growth, and I guess this is the point of what Donald Trump's been trying to do, is he's trying to promote a growth engine within the economy. He may fail, he may succeed. I mean, his past track record suggests that he might succeed. It's erring in his favor, certainly, that he might succeed in creating a growth engine. But what kind of let's take the tariff revenue as out for a moment. Let's just say that all of a sudden the world becomes free trade. I know Andrew is like, Christmas is coming, Festivus has come early, but let's take the tariff revenue out for just a moment. What kind of growth is needed within the US GDP to level out the increased debt that's been accounted for in the reconciliations?
Well, I mean, overall, I mean, for the whole debt as a whole, I mean,
not that national. I mean,
just from OBB. So what I tend to do is because the OBB is the meat and potatoes similar to the TC, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act.
Yes.
So when the Tax Cut and Jobs Act came out, the revenue, the growth projections were very similar. It was the growth expectations were minimal, 1%. 1.8%, yada, yada, yada. But actually turned out within the first year, the TCJA actually increased GDP and actually reached that 3% benchmark that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent typically talks about. It also raised real median incomes. Even at White House, it projected that I think the real median incomes were about $4,000. It actually came out to be $6,500. So these various things happen. Another factor too that's very important, especially for Trump's version of the economy, is capital investment. In the before the pandemic, capital investment was skyrocketing. Of course, the pandemic changed that. A new administration also changed that. But now, as you already see in the first few months of the new Trump administration, there's trillions of dollars in capital investment pouring in. Part of it is the expectation of lower income tax rates, lower corporate tax rates, and then of course working class lower tax rates as well is going to boost it. One thing I find comical is that when I watch these hearings on Capitol Hill, you always have lawmakers on one side of the aisle saying how tariffs are going to influence certain behaviors in the broader economy, but they never apply that to the income taxes or any other government tax rates, which I find absolutely astounding. Because of course, when you have lower taxes, people are going to respond. When under the TCJA, when they're lower tax rates, what did people do? They started spending more money, which of course, I mean, we all can agree that can be a foolish endeavor at times. But overall, for an economy that's 2/3 consumption, that was a positive development in the U.S. economy. So tax rates do influence people. It does influence businesses. Now, not only just tariffs.
So I'm just thinking that there's this idea that if you want to limit something, was this Reagan? If you want to limit something, tax it. If you want to expand it, deregulate it. Yeah. I think that was Reagan. Oh, I'm paraphrasing.
So that was Reagan. Yeah, that was Reagan. Yeah.
And then you think, well, people are wanting to put tax on the work that you do. And it's not an incentive to work. It's the same thing, right? If you want to minimize something, you tax it more. So you're by heavily taxing industry, investment, even down to your income tax on the work that you do on a daily basis. People aren't encouraged to do more by overtaxing it, which kind of nicely brings us on to the idea of the no tax on tips and overtime. Do you think, because overtime is actually quite an important part of overall GDP, I guess, right?
Not really. If you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, you see the number of people working overtime is about 20 million. So it's not a significant share of the economy. Of course, it's going to help those people.
This is actually what I'm getting at.
Maybe that will bolster the number of people who actually want to work overtime because now that work is going to be exempted.
Yeah, up to a certain amount, it's going to be exempted from tax. And I think that's kind of the point I'm making here, is that if you want to penalize something, tax it. If you want to limit it, tax it. But with a carve out on things like overtime, and people won't be paying, and because of course it's at a high rate as well, isn't it? It can push you into a higher tax bracket. If they can avoid that, then they're going to be more productive, aren't they? Isn't that how things work?
Yes, that would be. And I also think it would address some of the labor challenges in the U.S. economy today, particularly the no tax on tips. Because if you look at let's say the JOLTS data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you see that there's about 7.7 million people, short million people in the workforce. Particularly, a significant share of this is actually in the hospitality and leisure industry, which is the bread and butter for no tax for the tipped workers. So if you have that $25,000 deduction, perhaps more people would be incentivized to go into that field and try to make that extra cash. And of course, that sector has filled a lot of illegal immigrants. Now that they're being kicked out or no longer welcome to the country, more Americans can perhaps fill that need for labor.
So jobs for Americans with a lower tax rate.
Yeah,
I think, if it all works out, this is a great midterm message for President Trump. If not, it could be an even better message for the Democrats. Andrew Moran, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Andrew here on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We're joined today by Liberty Nation's national security correspondent, Dave Patterson. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Happy to be with you, Mark, always.
So, Dave, the big, beautiful bill went and passed in the Senate and the House, and then Donald Trump signed it on Independence Day, making it the law of the land. And you wrote a rather fascinating piece about how this impacts the Defense Department budget and how it puts it on almost like a wartime footing or wartime readiness footing. Give some details.
Yes, I think that's the case. If you look at the reconciliation bill as a supplemental, because it's basically not the base budget, and it adds $113 billion to the defense line, which pops the defense total top line above $1 trillion, which is not trivial. And
as Donald Rumsfeld used to say,
not nothing.
Not nothing.
and I think that but more importantly, it was essential. because what the reconciliation bill did is kind of prime the pump for other programs that are in the 26 base budget. For example, Golden Dome. In order to jumpstart Golden Dome, there's $25 billion in the reconciliation bill. So to have the full amount of money to really move that program along, it's going to show up again in the 26 base budget, and so you'll have that as an entire budget line, and it's things like that. Particularly important, I think, too, was the fact that the reconciliation bill was very keen on operations and what we call the O&M budget, operations and maintenance, the things that keep the warfighter fighting wars. And it was very clear that this was consistent with Secretary Hegseth's readiness and lethality and so forth.
Yeah, it's a lot of people would argue that $1 trillion for defense. Bear in mind, this number is never going to go down. Right, this is $1 trillion a year from here on out.
Perhaps not.
Perhaps not. It won't continue at that.
Remember
Remember
the base budget is not $1 trillion. It's the combination of the reconciliation bill and the 26 base budget, which makes it $1 trillion. So,
okay, but to continue with the project, so we're talking what, 880-ish. In the base budget, and then 113 or so,
right?
In the reconciliation. That's a lot of money.
Well, by any measure, I would
by any measure. Is that increased spending? I guess what people want to know is this grand total? Is this A, making America safer? Is it B, putting America far enough ahead of any potential enemies that might are either in existence now or might come into existence or prominence going forward? And C, is it all going to be, I guess, C, the last one is it all going to be money well spent? Because it is obviously delivered through government programs. We know those are notoriously bad. So let's talk about the A factor first here. In what way does the initial spending and the additional spending, make America a safer place to be? Now, you mentioned the Golden Dome. What else is there?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to note what's not there.
Okay.
And what's not there is any money for woke programs, CRT, for training, and also for nonsensical climate change initiatives. And in the 25 budget, there was about
or electric tanks.
Or electric tanks. Oh my goodness, yes. And in the 25 budget that Biden put forward, there's about $3 billion for climate change initiatives. That's all gone. That's all out of there because it's just simply non-value added. It should not. I want to throw out very quickly, because we can also throw out the baby with the bathwater. In many cases, the services were clever, and I know, surprise, but they were, in that they used that money to do capital investments in property.
Okay,
and to they call it base resilience. And they book kept it under this climate change crap, and with all due respect to crap everywhere, but to make buildings more capable of withstanding hurricanes and so forth. That was necessary.
Right.
During the Bush administration, we had an entire program to do that. We didn't call it climate change because it didn't have anything to do with the weather, other than the fact that you were making buildings more capable of withstanding bad weather. And you have to do that. I mean, that's good stewardship of dollars in your capital account. So those kinds of things, I think, are still there, but they're properly book kept, and military construction and so forth. But I think too that if you start to look at the base budget, because you have to look at it as a whole. I think I made this point in one of my articles. You can't look at it as one versus another or in isolation, because the reconciliation bill really is the pump primer for the 26 base budget, and the things that are important. And you can argue whether it's right or wrong, but they have eliminated Wedgetail, the E7A, which is AWACS for another, airborne warning and control system. Principally because it was, as I like to refer to them, it was a limping gazelle. Overcost, behind schedule, and unable to perform in the environment in which it was going to be. Now, you can argue about that last part, but the fact is that these are programs that die because they were not managed well. Wedgetail for the E7 has been on the books for a very, very long time. Should have been fielded years ago, but they're just not very good at acquisition anymore, and why, I don't know.
It's because you're not there in the Pentagon.
Well,
that's doing this anymore.
Yeah, I like to think that. I mean, throw me into that briar patch one more time.
So, well, that actually ties in with my third aspect of this. Is we're kind of hoping that if there is the budget, it's done now. We're kind of hoping that the money is spent wisely, and you've got these programs that, as you point out, they're years behind, and therefore, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, if a program that is engineering technology is several years behind schedule, it's almost axiomatically going to be obsolete or near obsolete by the time it does reach completion. Is that about right?
I won't go so far as to say obsolete. Let's say that it will be behind the power curve. It will not be as appropriate to the threat as it might otherwise have been had it been on time. And not only that, but you basically you limit the deterrence capability. If I've got the 6th generation airplane right now, then that's a deterrent, and it will be a deterrent until somebody decides that they're going to oppose me with something similar. But if I don't have it now, then I'm playing catch up, and the idea of deterrence is then pushed to the right, and it loses its effect. Now we can say, oh yeah, but we're going to have one. Oh yes sir, we're going to have one. But if it's not on the ramp, if it's not flying, then it's not a deterrent. And so I think that deterrence, you might write this down, deterrence today is worth a lot of deterrence sometime in the future.
Absolutely right. We're going to be back with Dave Patterson after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I continue to be Mark Angelides, and we're continuing our conversation with Liberty Nation's national security correspondent, Dave Patterson. Now, Dave, I want to move on from talking about the defense bill budget and talk about something that happened this week, and that was that Tucker Carlson had was quite a rare interview, I guess, for Western media with the Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian. And that came out on Monday. What was your overall take on that?
Well, I think that I listened to it, and I thought that okay, kudos to Carlson for getting the interview, and but I think he lost an opportunity to be far more probing, and pretty much let the Iranian president filibuster, if you will, talking about his point of view. If you wanted to synthesize what was said, U.S. good except when supporting Israel, U.S. bad, Israel always bad. And so, surprise, surprise, very, very little that could not have been predicted. But I think also that Tucker Carlson did not have, as I mentioned, as probing a questions as he might have otherwise, and then he didn't push back when things were obviously, propaganda being shoved his way.
Right. So yeah, that's he started off with basically three premises, right? What's Iran's goal? What does Iran think of America, and what does Iran think of Israel? The last one there, what does Iran think of Israel? I think no interview necessary to know what Iran thinks of Israel.
Yeah, that's true. And the whole idea, the premise that or his motivation for doing the interview was to ensure that the people of the United States had an accurate perception of what Iran was, what they think, and what their leadership is about. And yet, you have to ask yourself, okay, you didn't ask any, knock them down dead questions.
Sure.
So the kinds of things that Americans would really want to know is, why do you say this when it's absolutely not true? And we all know that. But he didn't push back on those kinds of things. So whether or not Americans were really informed, remains to be seen. There are things that were self-evident, like, what do you think of Israel? Well, duh.
Yeah.
You don't go out saying death to Israel and, send them Christmas presents. Or
Sure. However, they do also say death to America, right?
Yeah, and so, but he had a very interesting response to that.
Okay.
And one that's, that kind of pushes the limits of credibility and credulity, both those C words. And he said, well, we really don't mean death to the American people. That's not what we mean. What we really mean is, death to basically the behavior, the kinds of threats and all of this kind of stuff that come from the United States. And so we're really not meaning death to Americans, but to the kinds of things that we all hate, right? We all hate these things. And
right. Yeah, it's so for me, there's something about motivations that I find most interesting, because let's be clear, you wrote about, before the interview came out, you wrote about what you can expect from this, and for all intents and purposes, you nailed it. That's what we got. You can read Dave's. I don't want to call it a prediction. Dave Cassandra Patterson. But I did the Delphic Oracle of National Security. So please, listeners, do go and check out what Dave set forth was probably going to happen, and he was pretty right on that, I think. But as to motivations, now, I'm really just formulating ideas here on this, but I think from both sides there's a couple of motivations. Number one, Tucker Carlson wanted to interview somebody that nobody else would interview, and he did that, or nobody else could interview as well. Because the Iranian president, it's not like he's off doing The View or going on MSNBC. So for him, it was, I got to get this guy in, and I want to ask the questions. And he knew full well that if he asked a question, I mean, this is my opinion on this. I might have it entirely wrong, but this is how it seems to me. My analysis on it is that if he'd asked a question that would have stumped the president, or, as you say, well, that's clearly a lie, why not tell us the truth, that would have been the end of the interview, because
that's correct.
They don't owe Tucker Carlson anything, right?
Right.
And then from President Pezeshkian's side, I think, and again, I might have this wrong, but it seems to me that it's an overture before peace.
I think you could actually make that case that he's kind of testing the waters, what will be the outcome. Now, because of his basic inclination to obfuscate and not really put the truth.
He's a politician.
Yeah, and so he runs the risk of that getting in the way of whatever he intends to do. But if I were to make one point here, and it's a bit of a criticism, no, it actually is a criticism, not a bit of one. With Carlson, is that he makes the point in his teaser that he has invited Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the same kind of an interview.
Sure.
And then I got to say, wait a second. what you're doing here is you're establishing some sort of moral equivalence between this horrific state, Iran, that is the number one purveyor of terrorism all over the world, with Israel. No, that does not work. You have to have some other way of bringing an alternative view. You cannot bring the Prime Minister of Israel, which the United States stands behind, as some at least paragon of right versus evil, and put him on the stage with evil. That does not work.
Again, devil's advocate here. I would say that if I were the Iranian president, I would say that, we are equivalent. And therefore, to get the interview, you've got to put that equivalence forward.
Well, then there is the alternative. I don't need that much of the interview that much.
And then nobody gets to hear. Otherwise, what do we get to hear? We get to hear nothing but what comes out of Iranian state-owned media.
But now you get to hear.
You could argue that that's pretty much what we got.
That's what you got. Yeah, you get the state-owned media talking points.
Sure.
Only they get to be on Tucker Carlson's platform.
But doesn't that ignore the that we both agree is an overture towards peace, and isn't that really what is the ideal goal?
Well, I think that that remains to be seen.
Sure.
But it does not take away from the basic criticism that you cannot have this moral equivalency.
Sure.
And push that, because that's what comes across. Well, Benjamin Netanyahu is of the same moral stature as these murderers in Iran. No, that does not work.
Dave Patterson, strong words, strong opinions, and as always, great analysis. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Thank you, Mark.
And that, dear listeners, is about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I'd like to first thank our guests for joining us today and then leave you with a final thought. So, Andrew Moran, economics editor at libertynation.com, and Dave Patterson, national security correspondent. Thank you both for taking the time to come in and join us. And of course, extend my thanks to you, the listeners at home, for taking the time to join us. So my parting thought for this week, based on what we've been discussing today, Ronald Reagan, speaking in 1982, when rededicating a warship, he said, quote, "When we've taken up arms, it has been for the defense of freedom, for ourselves and for other peaceful nations who needed our help. But now, faced with the development of weapons of immense destructive power, we have no choice but to maintain ready defense forces that are second to none. Yes, the cost is high, but the price of neglect would be infinitely higher." End quote. And I think, and I'm sure, in fact, what Reagan was getting at there is that there's an ever-changing threat in the world, and the ideals that were once held are now being usurped by current situations, and new threats call for new attitudes. But also, Ronald Reagan was very much the pragmatist, and he understood that the values that founded the nation, that have held the nation together over so many years and through so much, need to remain as strong as they ever did. Just something to think about. Thank you for being here. Please remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.